Hey,
What up,
buddy.
y'all? What up? Kalani, my friend, how are you?
I'm doing good. It's good to see you.
I'm so honored to be here with you. This is going to be epic.
Oh yeah, well, we're honored to have you. Really appreciate you taking a little time out of your busy
My
schedule
joy.
because you just jumped off of the songwriting thing. Is that right? Weren't you just doing
Yeah,
your?
yeah, we just launched a big songwriting school with Mav City and Leland, and yeah, it's going cool.
Awesome. Yeah, there's actually somebody in this webinar that was just in there with you, so they just hopping from.
Hilarious. That's awesome.
That's very cool. Well, hey, this time's going to go by super fast, I know, but we've got we've got folks in here already. There's questions already piling up in the Q&A in this webinar, so
Cool.
I promise them we're going to get to their questions. So I hope
Let's
you're
do
ready.
it.
Are you ready?
I'm, I'm born ready. Let's
Yeah,
go.
I know you are. Well, listen, real quick, tell us what you've been. I mean, I know you're doing the songwriting course right now, but what else have you been up to? What's going on? I know you. I think you're getting ready, or you've been doing some worship nights. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
so for those who don't know, so I've been leading worship for almost 25 years since I was 11 years old. Um, when I became a teenager, I went off to Bible school and I started the Lord just started opening doors. So from that point till now, I've had the honor of leading worship in 79 different nations, put out a bunch of music over the years, led worship all over the place. But for the past about 4 years or so, I saw a gigantic need for training and equipping in the place of worship. I was distressed to see, like, if you wanted real training and equipping in the place of worship, you either had to wait for a worship conference or find like a random book that's, I mean, Don Potter put out a book, Facing the Wall, but as awesome as it is, it's wonderful and everyone should go get it. But it was like for that generation as well, and there wasn't a ton of resources out for for this generation. So to be honest with you, I kind of just I came to this crossroads, like, okay, am I going to continue to do the music thing only, or am I going to become like two-handed, like those who built the wall, Nehemiah's wall? The Bible said they had a sword in one hand and a tool in the other hand. And I'm like, man, I've been swinging my sword of worship for a long time, but now I need to actually take this tool and build the body of Christ as far as, training and equipping in the place of worship. So the past handful of years or so, I've really given myself to training and equipping. Yes, we do courses. We do all that stuff. The main thing that we do is actually called Worship Coach, worshipcoach.com. We've got over almost 600 lessons on all things worship, both practical and spiritual. Stephanie Gretzinger, Carrie Job, Jason Upton, a ton of your favorite worshipers are on there, along with myself. We are your coaches, and we're there to inspire, encourage, champion you. Along with theology training, we have practical trainings like how to lead your worship team. Then we have music and vocal lessons as well, like drums, bass, piano, guitar, violin, ukulele. The guy who's teaching vocals is the guy who taught me and Carrie Job vocals, all these years ago. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty cool resource. We're just giving ourselves to training and equipping because honestly, Kalani, you and I can't be the only guy and gals out there. There can't just be, 24 guys and gals doing this. Like, we have to give ourselves, and that's how come I love what you're doing with opportunities like this webinar and all the stuff that you're doing, because we need tens of thousands of not just worship leaders, but worship mothers and worship fathers to arise in the earth. And, it's the days of just being a worship artist are over. You can't just be an artist. Like, if you give yourself to just be the artist, your little wave will kind of crest and then it'll be over. But if you give yourself to mothering and fathering in the place of worship, understanding that it has nothing to do with age, it has everything to do with heart posture. When you give yourself to mothering and fathering worship, your crest, the crest of your wave doesn't just die down. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because essentially you're giving your influence, your wisdom, your knowledge, your opportunity away to others. So anyways, that's the nutshell version of kind of what we've been up to, the long and the short. So
Yeah.
we're glad to
Yeah.
be here with you.
That's so good. And you get me fired up because you and I are like-hearted and
Let's go.
What we're like, what we're passionate about. Like that's how I am too. I love, of course, leading worship and all that stuff. But man, the biggest joy for me is equipping and teaching.
Come on.
A smaller, sometimes a more local level, but like seeing the fruit of that, and it's incredible. And I love what you said. Like that has lasting fruit that carries on, well beyond us and our time and our, our.
And, I mean, Kalani, I'm thinking even like guys and gals like me and you, we were so honored, privileged, spoiled even to be able to sit in the room with the Leonard Jones and the Don Potters and the Susies and the whoever else, those guys and gals, the Kevin Proshes, and those guys and gals who kind of went ahead of us. And it's interesting. I talk to people about this quite a bit, especially when we're talking about rising up as a worship mother or a worship father. When we were coming up, I noticed my mothers and fathers were like in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. But now we can be mothers and fathers in our 20s and 30s because we can't wait till we're 60 and 70 to start speaking up and training and equipping. We got to do it now because the time is ripe, the harvest is ripe, and the laborers are few. So we got to raise them up. Yeah,
that's good. All right. Are you ready we're just going to plow through some questions.
Born ready. Born ready.
All right. Here's the first question. And it's, I saw someone else in the Q&A ask a similar question. So we'll put them together. And it's really kind of in a nutshell. I know this is a big question, but I think you can knock it out quick. The difference between praise and worship was a question that was put in the chat. And my question to ask you was, why is praise important?
Absolutely. So let's start with the difference between praise and worship. The first place that we see the word worship mentioned is actually in the story of Abraham and Isaac. And whenever Abraham's going up to go sacrifice Isaac at the time, he didn't know that there was going to be a ram in the bush yet. He's doing this act of obedience and he's getting his squad ready and he goes, guys, we're going to go up to worship. And that Hebrew word there, I forget what it is. We're just talking about this just yesterday, actually. CJ and I just did a video on this yesterday.
I think it's
shakah. So the word shakah actually means to prostrate yourself, or basically to humble yourself. And I love what Ray Hughes says. It's a way to bring your head below your heart. It's basically when we worship, the simplest way that I describe worship is internal engagement. It's humbling ourselves enough to say, God, I'm not going to just live by my intellect alone or by things that I can see in the natural alone. I'm going to step out in faith. And listen, for you, an act of faith might just be, singing a song that you don't necessarily see happening in your life at that moment, but by faith, you're declaring it. Or maybe by faith for you is, God made a promise to you about maybe you're going to impact the nations and you're like, God, I don't even have any connections in the nations. I don't got any resources right now. I don't have any open doors. But maybe what you're going to do in act of faith is to bless somebody who does go to the nations. So literally worship is whenever we bow our intellect below the promise that God has made to our heart. So I say it like this: worship is internal engagement. And then when it comes to praise in Psalm 149, Psalm 149 talks about the high praises. Sing, dance, praise, rejoice, be joyful, cry aloud. Like, y'all, you're being joyful is a high praise. So there we see just in Psalm 149 alone, there's a lot of external expression. And then, of course, we have the 7 Hebrew words for praise. Every single one of them talks about an external expression, whether it's tamar, to play the strings, whether it's yada, to shoot the hands, or halal, to spin around, like a clamorously foolish top. It literally means to just spin around like a wild, foolish dude or gal who's like, looks like a top. So all of those words for praise are external expressions. So obviously praise and worship does and can overlap many times. No, it's not just the slow songs is worship and the fast songs are praise.
Right.
Worship is internal engagement. Praise is external expression. So you might be doing praise and worship during a slow song. You might be praising during a slow song. You might be worshiping during a fast song. But the biggest point is this: we need to have our internal man engaged. And the more we get engaged on the inside, the more we are going to want to express on the outside. And for me, that's praise and worship. So to the B part of your question with praise, the reason why praise is so important, guys, because going back to Psalm 149, the Bible lists all of these incredible high praises: sing, dance, praise, rejoice, be joyful, cry aloud. But then in verse 6, Psalm 149, verse 6 says this: let the high praises of God be in their mouth and a two-edged sword in their hand. So literally, when we begin to release that external expression of praise and our hearts are engaged internally, God doesn't just hear our songs, God begins to hear our faith. And those high praises become a weapon of mass destruction against our enemy. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 22, it's a story of Jehoshaphat, and the Bible says this: when the people began to praise, God sent ambushes against their enemies. I tell people all the time, Kalani, like, especially, the guys, like the real egotistic dudes out there who are like, I don't feel like singing. I'm not a dancer. I'm not a ballerina. I'm not asking you to be a ballerina. Worship and praise are not suggestions. They are commands. The Lord commands us to praise, whether you're feeling it or not, whether you're a singer or not. Listen, you want to stay bound up? Fine, then don't praise. I will become even more undignified than this, because the level of your praise determines the level of your breakthrough, y'all. And so you got to get your praise on. You got to sing, dance, praise, rejoice, because what the Lord does is he turns it into a weapon against our enemies. And then a couple more verses down, I believe it's verse 8, it says to remove let me just pull it up right quick. But basically, here's the thing. When you engage in the high praises, the Lord takes the chains that the enemy tried to bind you with, and he binds your enemies with them. Let's see here. Let me pull it up here. Yeah, so verse 6, may the high praises of God be in their mouth, two-edged sword in their hand. It says to bind their kings with chains and their nobles with fetters of iron. So when we praise, God literally takes the chains that the enemy tried to entrap us with. He removes them off of us and he binds your enemies. So listen, you might think it's goofy to shout. You might think it's goofy to dance. You might think it's goofy to sing a joyful melody, even though you're not a singer, or to lift your hands. This is so dumb, Lord. Why are we doing this? God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. God is still in the business of doing that. And I'm telling you, we got to get our praise on. But you got a song about that, though, Kalani.
I probably do.
Praise is the breakthrough, my Lord.
Yep. There's two things you touched on. I think they were so important. The first thing you mentioned was about the connection between praise and faith. It's like praise gives our faith a voice. And the other thing that I actually had a question about, we don't have to get into it now, but it was like not waiting until you feel like it, because a lot of times we don't feel like it, we don't do the very thing that's going to bring the breakthrough that we need.
And the problem with that too, guys, is whenever we simply go off of our feelings and we're like, oh, we don't feel like it, then you're making a terrible mistake by putting your feelings on the throne, and you're removing God from the throne. Our feelings are not meant to be on the throne of our heart. God is supposed to be on the throne of our heart, whether we feel like praising or not. Sometimes the act of faith is to praise your way into the truth, praise your way into the breakthrough. So don't let your feelings be your king.
Exactly. Yeah. The question I had was, what role do my emotions play in worship? And the first thing that you just mentioned is that they're definitely not meant to be on the throne or driving the car, or dictating what you do or don't do. Obviously, our emotions do have a role in worship, right? And like,
Yeah, God is a God of emotions, guys. Like, I know a lot of times people knock emotionalism in the church and in the place of worship. And to some extent, I actually agree with that. Like, I think, I was talking with a friend recently, and, as believers, especially worshipers, it's not our job to like whoop people into this emotional experience. In fact, that's like what witch doctors and shamans do. They whoop them into this thing. So it's not our job to hype people in that way. And I think that's where emotionalism, where we get a little dangerous and we start crossing lines, is whenever we use emotion to manipulate. However, God is a real person with real emotions, and I believe he's given us emotions not to be our master, but for us to master them. In fact, it is very appropriate at times to worship God with laughter, or worship God with tears, or, bring our frustration and anger to him and say, God, I don't know what's going on. I'm tired of this. Would you please help me? And this is classic David in the Psalms. Psalm chapter 3, David is crying out to God that God would just blast his enemies in the mouth. God, punch my enemies in the mouth. Ah! And then other times, David is super like, emo with it. Like, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul long, there is all of that spectrum of emotions. And I think as long as we are not using emotions to manipulate, however, but rather using our emotions to serve our worship and to help further our expression, that's the appropriate way to integrate emotion into our worship.
So good. Okay, I'm gonna try to like speed us through some of these questions.
Let's go.
All right, let's go. How do you prepare to lead worship? I think that's a good question.
How do I personally prepare to lead worship?
Yeah. Spiritual, practical, whatever you got.
Okay, I will keep it 100 with y'all. I'm in a season, I got small kids, like changing diapers. My dog runs away sometimes. Like, my preparation for worship practically is literally to try to keep a sweet heart while life is just exploding all around each and every one of us every day, right? Like,
that's real. That's real.
I'm keeping it 100. And honestly, like, here's what I found. Like, when I can be consistent with preferring my wife and loving my kids and treating my neighbor as I want to be treated, I will tell y'all this, like, when I stand on a stage to lead worship, it's always more powerful when I actually pass the off-stage test of just keeping my heart sweet in the midst of life. So that's like a practical way that I prepare for worship. But a spiritual way is, dude, you cannot fake intimacy with God. Either you have it or you don't. There's a lot of things that you can fake in worship, but intimacy with him is not one of them. So even in the midst of my crazy busy life, every single one of us are busy. Every single one of us have crazy schedules and all this stuff. But I make it a point, even though I'm dropping the ball in many different areas of my life and I'm working on all of them, the one place in my life that I refuse to drop the ball in is in my time with him. Because friends, it seems elementary, but it's really not. It's the key to everything. It's the key to life. Conversation with Jesus, both in talking to him and listening to him, conversation with him is the unlock. It's the answer. It's the key to everything. So, right now, when I was younger, I was practicing my instruments a lot more, practicing my vocal a lot more, whatever. Now, I'm literally just trying to keep my heart sweet in the midst of life and trying to spend time with Jesus and keep our conversation going. Yeah. That's literally how I prepare to lead worship.
That's good. And that's real, for sure.
Keeping it 100 with y'all.
Keeping it 100. All right, next question. Okay, yeah. What do you think about concert style worship? Worship concert.
Like a worship concert? I think Yeah, I think everything is relative to the posture of the heart, guys. Um, when it comes to worship, I don't have the right to judge anybody's motive or heart but my own. So somebody who's putting a concert on, their motive might be, man, we want to offer as much excellence to the Lord as possible. And I know, and you know, Kalani, many people who that is their motive. They want the lights to be nice. They want the sound to be nice. They want everything to look nice, not because they're trying to appear nice before man. They simply want to offer an excellent offering to God. But then I know other people and other moves or whoever who they want it to be nice because it's for man. But guys, let's flip it on the other side, okay? Because instead of making it about concerts, let's bring it back to the heart. I know people who have really bad production and they still have a bad heart motive. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's not about how cool it's produced or not. It is heart motive. I know people who their stages and their sound is wretched, and it's not because they're like some super humble, we want to honor Jesus. It's because they're too prideful to go out and buy a soundboard or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it all comes down to, it's not about the production, guys and gals. It's literally about the heart posture. So my take on it is, if the heart posture is sweet, I will stand in the bushes of Africa with no production and worship, or I'll stand on the stage with lights, cameras, smoke machines. As long as the heart posture is solid and pure, God sees that and he honors that. It's not about the external. It's always the internal with God.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Okay, here's a question about the presence of the Lord. This is a good question. What's the difference between the sovereign presence of God and the manifest presence? What I mean is, sometimes in a worship service, we experience a tangible presence of God, and sometimes it feels dry. When it feels dry in the atmosphere, doesn't mean God's presence is not there.
Again, this comes down to, feelings, right? Like we talked about feelings a little bit earlier. Just because it, quote unquote, feels dry in the room doesn't mean that God is not moving, that he's not speaking. God is omnipresent. He is in every place at every single moment of the day. For me, it comes down to, it's not, I think, and I hear what this person is asking and I respect it and I love it. I think it's a wonderful question. But I think that the way that it's being described is a little churchy, if I could just keep it real with y'all, because the Bible doesn't talk about the sovereign presence and the manifest presence. The Bible just calls it the presence. Listen, the nearness to God is up to us. If you're ever dry in your spirit, it's not God's fault. If you're ever like, man, I don't feel the presence, it's not God's fault. His presence is there. I think we need to shift our perspective on this, and we need to start seeing it as, have I cultivated his presence in my life? Not, is it sovereign or is it manifest? Have I cultivated it? Have I paid enough attention to him? Have I spent enough time with him? Have I cleared enough things in my life to let him know your presence has the seat of honor in my life? If I have, then it doesn't matter if it's quote unquote dry in the room or not. I'm with him and he is with me. So that's my take on the presence of God. It's never God's fault. It's always up to us to cultivate, because he's already there. Yeah. Many times we miss it just because we're too distracted and we're not paying enough attention.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's like a song we all know that says, let us become more aware of your presence. That's a big part of it, because there are times when like he is moving, and some people in the room are really engaging and being touched because they have set their, they've set their focus in that way, and other people aren't feeling anything because they're distracted. There's not that awareness of his presence. So a lot of times it comes down to that. You're absolutely right. Awesome. Okay. Maybe just a quick answer on this one. What is the difference between personal and corporate worship?
Yeah, absolutely. Personal worship is more devotional. That is your intimate personal time with God. Now, can God speak to you personally in a corporate time? Of course he can, and he does all the time. But the purpose of personal worship time is personal devotion. The purpose of corporate worship, besides the obvious of exalting Jesus, is actually corporate unity. Remember in Acts chapter 2, the Bible says that when the people were in one accord, then the sound occurred, then the tongues of fire. So God has instituted the place of corporate unity because God understands if we can get unity, then we can get breakthrough. And so my biggest suggestion to people who are have the honor, excuse me, and the privilege of leading corporate worship, the quicker you can get unity in the room is as quick as you can get breakthrough in the room. So again, can God speak to you personally? Yes. Does he speak to me personally in corporate worship? Many times. But the purpose of corporate worship is not private devotion. The purpose of corporate worship is corporate unity that leads to corporate breakthrough.
Right. That's really good. And in that place of corporate unity, that's the place where we can begin to agree with what God is saying in the moment and begin to declare. That's when things can shift.
100%.
Prophetic 100%. Worship and all of that good stuff. Let's see here. Speaking of prophetic worship, here's a question. What is prophetic worship and how do you know your spiritual gifts?
Awesome. It's a twofold question, but we're here for it. So here's the deal. Prophetic worship, the simplest way that I can describe prophetic worship to any of you is prophetic worship is simply the right thing at the right time. Now let me back up a little bit and build a little context around this. Revelation 19:10b says the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. This means anything that testifies to the lordship of Jesus is prophetic. It's not about spontaneous. It's about what is pointing to Jesus's lordship in this moment. And so for me, I don't just want prophetic worship. I want a prophetic lifestyle. I want to live a prophetic culture. I want prophetic marriage, prophetic kids, prophetic finances, prophetic relationships. And then a byproduct just so happens to be, because I'm living a prophetic culture, it just so happens that when I go to worship, it is a byproduct. Prophetic worship is the byproduct of living a prophetic culture. It's not some switch that we turn on and off. It's a culture that we live. It's a part of who we are, just like your marriage, your kids, your finances, your relationships. So with that being said, if it's testifying to the lordship of Jesus, then it is prophetic. So meaning prophetic worship is not necessarily spontaneous, and spontaneous worship is not necessarily prophetic. Right. Here's the example, okay? God could be saying, if we take Revelation 19:10b into this context and we say, okay, if it's testifying to his lordship, what he wants to do in this moment, then we've got to do what he wants to do in this moment. That's prophetic. So if God is saying, I want to release peace into the atmosphere, I could potentially spontaneously start playing wild, crazy music spontaneously, but it's not pointing to the lordship of Jesus in that situation. So I think we need to understand, first and foremost, what is the prophetic? How does it work? Second of all, that the prophetic is a culture we live. It's not a switch that we turn on and off in our worship. And therefore, our prophetic worship is a byproduct of a culture that we live. And therefore, the simplest way to say it is prophetic worship is the right thing at the right time. Sometimes Jesus is overturning tables. Sometimes he's having a fish fry at the beach with his friends. Sometimes he's like in agony, intercession, crying out in Gethsemane. We need to know him well enough that we can accurately express what he's doing and saying in that moment. That's why it's the right thing at the right time.
That's good. Anything on the spiritual, how you know your spiritual gifts part of the question?
How do you know your spiritual gifts? Just try them all out. Try prophesying over people. Try healing people. Try, there's a lot of times spiritual gifts are actually practical too. Like hospitality is a spiritual gift. Paul tells us that in Corinthians. And you ain't going to know if you have the gift of hospitality unless you try to host some people and host the presence of God. Like I would say go out there and try them, and whichever ones feel the best for you, keep doing those. And that's the best way to find your spiritual gifts.
There you go. There you
It's
go.
not so complicated, guys. We overcomplicate things a lot.
That's right. That's right. All right. Now this is a good question. I'd be curious to see if you have any thought, any insight on this, Rick. This is what does it mean? So the scripture that talks about worshiping the Lord in the beauty of holiness. Do you have any insight on what that phrase means, to worship in the beauty of holiness?
The way that I see that scripture in Psalms is that when the Bible encourages us to worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness, I see it like this. The more we gaze upon his beauty, the more a spirit of holiness is released into our lives. Because he is holy. He is Kadesh. He is separate. There is none like him. And when we gaze upon that beauty, a byproduct of gazing on the beauty is to actually become holy as he is holy.
Yeah, that's good. Speaking of Psalms, what is your favorite Psalm and why? Do you have a favorite?
Oh man, you know, I
can't ever.
I know. I mean, it's like, who's your favorite child? You know, it's like, they're all my favorites. I would say currently right now, I am in Psalm 148. I am just absolutely blown away that the sun, the moon, the stars, the animals, the insects, the waves, you know, outer space, angels, all of it, they are worshiping. You know what I'm saying? That's what Psalm 148. And here's the mind-blowing part to me. Us on earth, out of Psalm 148, where we are the ones commanding creation to worship. We're saying angels, which is mind-blowing. It's like, angels, you better worship him. You know, dogs and cats and lions and cows and sheep worship him, you know. Oceans, let him roar, worship him. Trees, you better worship him. I think it's just absolutely mind-blowing that A, that all of creation is doing this, and B, it's part of our responsibility to lead the charge and lead the command of this.
That's really good. I love that. I love that. All right, now I'm going to ask you one of my questions.
Come on with it.
Okay, here's the question. How can our worship team prepare for revival?
Off of the stage.
Yeah.
You can prepare for revival by spending more time off of the stage. Too many people think that we are going to like get it, quote unquote, by having a once a week rehearsal and a 25-minute worship set on Sunday mornings. It's just not going to happen. You got to get into the trenches with people, guys. You got to laugh together. You got to cry together. You got to eat together. You got to go to movies together. You got to be there when somebody's going through grief, and, you know, go visit the hospital when their kid's born. And you got to get into the trenches with people, because for me, revival is family. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what it is. Obviously, the word revival means life again, but the thing that brings life again is whenever you are refreshed by healthy family. You're not going to build family at a once a week rehearsal and a 25-minute worship set on Sunday morning. It's just not going to happen. You've got to spend more time together off of the stage. And a lot of times the issues that come up in worship teams, like suspicion and jealousy and, you know, all of those things are there because we've simply not spent enough time together off of the stage. The reason why you're suspicious about Sister Susie being, you know, a little bit more mean than usual. Oh, she probably just doesn't like me. She's so mean. Maybe she lost a loved one and you're just simply not close enough to her to know what she's going through. So instead of having compassion, that's what God wants you to have, the enemy is sowing seeds of discord, seeds of suspicion instead. So when you get to know somebody's heart and you become that healthy family, that to me is what revival looks like. And if you can get healthy family and revival off of the stage, then of course you're going to absolutely have it on the stage. So I would spend more time together off the stage.
That's good. Perfect. Love it. Okay. Okay. This person wants to know, Rick, when did you start to lead worship and how did you know you were called to be a worship leader?
Awesome. I started leading worship when I was 11. So My youth pastor came up to me on one Sunday morning. We had youth groups on Wednesday nights. My youth pastor came to me on a Sunday morning and said, "Hey, you're leading worship on Wednesday night." I didn't know how to play. I didn't know how to sing. I didn't know anything. I wasn't a musician yet. I was like, "What? You're kidding me. I'm 11. He's like, "No, here's my guitar. Here's a D chord." And I'm like, "What?" Because y'all, y'all are so spoiled. This is pre-YouTube, guys. Like, Kalani, you remember those days? I think we're about the same age. Like, there was a time where you couldn't just go on YouTube and go, guitar lessons. Like, you just couldn't do that. And so this is those days, and I'm like, a D chord, what? And so I'm trying my best to play this D chord. Y'all, I was so terrified. I sang 2 songs. I sang Let the River Flow by Daryl Evans. Let the river flow, let the river flow. And I sang, we are standing on holy ground. But here's the punchline. I only knew 1 chord. Imagine singing 2 songs with 1 chord. It was wretched. Listen, it is impossible for any of you to have a worst worship set, a more terrible worship set than the first time I ever led worship. It's just impossible. It was the worst thing that humanity has ever experienced, especially me, and it was just wretched. So I was 11. I blazed through them as fast as I could with 1 chord, and my parents and my youth pastor came up with lying spirits and said, "That was awesome." And I was like, "No, it wasn't. That was terrible. I'm never doing this again." And of course, they're like, "You're doing it again next week. Go for it." I'm like, "Oh, Lord." So I started leading worship at 11. And to be honest with y'all, I didn't know. I came from a church community that didn't have a lot of language, so there was we didn't even have language of like calling or, anything like that. I was just, we're just going to church and holding on tight till Jesus comes and returns. That was the mindset of the church I grew up in. And I'm thankful for the good things that I got from that. But, I was already out leading worship, traveling the globe, for about 5 or 6 years. So at this point, I'm like 23 or 24 years old. And it just dawned on me one day. I remember I was flying overseas, and I'm on this flight, and it just dawned on me like, maybe, because especially as a young person and all these doors open up, you're just kind of riding the wave. You're just like, well, this is cool. I guess I'll keep doing this. And that's what I did for years. I'm like, well, sure, we'll come lead worship, I guess. And then one day I just had this thought that dawned on me like, oh my gosh, maybe this is what I'm supposed to do forever. Right. And so that's kind of how I realized I didn't have language to know that, like, well, Rick, this could be a big part of your calling here, bro. I just didn't have it. So that's how it unlocked for me. I started leading at 11, and then I didn't know that I was called to do it until I'd been doing it for years.
Wow. I love hearing your story. I don't think I'd ever heard that before. That's cool. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see if I can zip through a few more. What are some practical ways to grow in your secret place with God, your secret place life with God?
The best and the biggest unlock for secret place is just consistency. I mean, guys, for any one of us who have relationships, first and foremost, you don't become best friends with anyone on accident, especially God. You have to show up and be consistent. There are times, I was just talking with a friend earlier today, I'm in a season right now where there's not a ton of dialogue going on between God and I. Like, I'm not saying a whole lot. He's not saying a whole lot. I don't have a whole lot to say right now. And he's not saying a whole lot back to me. And it's wonderful. We're just in this moment of just enjoying each other's company. Like, I'll just show up and just sit with them. And Lord, I love being here with you. And then there are moments where I'm like going through something and I'm like, God, please help me. Oh, and he's like, okay, I got you. And then there are other moments that I show up and he's the one weeping to me about what's on his heart. And I'm just there for all of it. I'm just there for all of it. So the biggest unlock on the secret place is just consistency, guys. No matter what's going on in that place, if it's quiet, if it's loud, if there's distress, if there's peace, whatever's going on in that place, just keep showing up for it. There is no magic formula. Just keep showing up.
Right. That's good. And it's good to know, like, every day is not necessarily going to be like this revelatory time when you get this major download from the Lord and your journal. Some days it's just like showing up and being there and just being
Yep.
with him and dialing down and like you said, being consistent, building that history with God. It's
Yep.
I know I've heard Mike Bickle say that a bajillion times, building your
Yeah.
history with God. All right. This is a good question. What role does lament play in worship? Like, I mean, obviously we see that in the Psalms and things with David, but what role does lament play in worship? How do you make space for that? Like, and I would say, like, even in a corporate setting, is that appropriate? Is there a place for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I think we need a lot more songs that do express lament. And for those who don't know what lament is, it's basically songs that help with grief. I mean, y'all, we as humans, we need a lot of help, and we go through a lot of pain, a lot of hardships, and it is absolutely appropriate to express our trust, our pain, our worship to God in the place of lamenting. And I think we have a lot of like Jesus is my superhero songs going on right now, which is absolutely true and right. But we need some songs that help us grieve. We need some songs that help us find God in that valley. And here's the thing that I love about the lamenting Psalms and even the book of Lamentations. There's a lot of lamenting going on, and when it comes to biblical songs of lament, they're not just songs that keep us wallowing. They're songs that meet us in that place, and then in a lot of ways help us sing our way back to God.
Yeah.
And so I think we need a lot more of those. We don't have a ton of lamenting songs right now. We need more. And in the place of corporate worship, I think, is there a place for it? There certainly is. And I think it's through times of corporate loss or corporate grief. That would be the most appropriate time to have times of corporate lament, corporate, grieving songs that help us sing our way back to God. God, we're in a valley, but we're going to sing our way back to you on the mountaintop, knowing that your promises are yes and amen. Knowing that even though we don't understand it, we're going to trust you and we're going to trust your goodness. So we need a lot more of them.
Yeah, that's good. And maybe piggybacking off of that question, the next question would be, do you think that modern worship songs are more about God just giving us something, or do you think that modern day worship songs are about the glory of God? So this is just kind of a question of like, where are we in modern worship and the songs that are coming out of that? Do you feel like we're leaning heavily in one direction or the other? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of wonderful things going on in the modern worship movement. We need to understand and remember, y'all, that when it comes to worship, there are three kinds of songs. There are man to God songs. Then there are God to man songs. Not that God worships us, he doesn't, but Zephaniah 3 says he sings over us. Why does God like singing so much? Because he's a singer. Why does he ask us, come into my presence with singing? Why? Because he's a singer. So man to God songs, God to man songs, and then there are man to man songs, songs that we encourage. Again, we don't worship one another, but we encourage one another through songs. So I think the bulk of the songs need to be vertical, and we need to be focusing on our vertical ministry to him first. But then a lot of times a byproduct of touching his heart will be something that comes from his heart back to us, songs that he sings over us. And then it's so wonderful that I look over at Kalani and I'm like, girl, did you see what he just did? And we begin to encourage one another in songs like that as well. So I don't think I don't know if the question is fishing for like, me coming down on the modern worship movement or not. But I think there's a lot of all of those kind of songs going on. I think we could use a whole lot more vertical songs to Jesus, because if it's not about Jesus, then we're missing it. But there are absolutely appropriate times and appropriate songs for him singing over us or us singing to one another. How great is our God? Sing with me. How great. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's okay. Like when that song came out, I heard a lot of people kind of bashing it. Like, why are you going to sing to one another? Well, that's biblical. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. That's the room calling out back and forth to each other, y'all. So those are the three songs: man to God, God to man, and then man to man.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good answer. Okay. Here's the last question in the Q&A. It is, what is a worship pastor? I would love to be one if it's in God's will.
Awesome. Yeah, I would suggest this, like, worship pastor. So those are two things. A, you got to be a worshiper, and B, maybe God has called you to be a shepherd. So what is a worshiper? A worshiper is somebody who absolutely loves the presence of God more than anything and loves to express that thanksgiving to the Lord. So every single one of us should be worshipers. We're not just baristas, we're worshipers, comma, baristas. We're not just car salesmen, we're worshipers, comma, car salesmen. We're not just lawyers, we're worshiper, comma, lawyer, worshiper, comma, grandma, worshiper, whatever. We're worshipers first, we're everything else second. So you've already got half the battle done, hopefully, trusting that you're a worshiper. Second of all, pastoring. You know, pastoring, you essentially, the book of Jeremiah says that the Lord was going to give us shepherds after his own heart. So that means that there are going to be people who love to shepherd the people of God in a spirit of the heart like the Father. And essentially that's what a pastor is. It's someone who gives guidance and love and shepherding and correction when needed and guidance and all of that stuff. So if you got those two things together, if you're a worshiper and maybe God's called you to be a shepherd or a pastor, you bring those two together and then you shepherd people in the place of worship. In a lot of ways, Kalani is a worship pastor, not just physically, but look what she's doing with this webinar, you know. I'm a worship pastor if you want to look at it like that, you know. So it's not this, it doesn't have to necessarily be vocational as much as it is just calling and heart and passion.
Yeah, that's good. All right, last question will just be a fun one as we wrap up. Who were some of your biggest worship leader influences when you were younger? I heard you mention some names earlier, but who would you say were the biggest influencers?
To this day, my biggest worship influence has been Kevin Prosh. 100% hands down. If you don't know who that is, man, you're missing out. Prosh he was a poet, he was a lyricist, and the guy, I think the thing that I just loved about him most is obviously tremendously gifted songwriter, lyricist, poet, but dude, the guy just broke all the rules. Like he'd be leading worship from a sitar at one moment and then like weeping on the next song and just throw it on there. Just, I don't care. Let's just keep all of the snot coming out, everything, just leave it on the worship record, you know, just, and then at other times he had a song called Harp in My Heart. You've probably heard that song, Kalani. And in this song, he goes, you love the Presbyterians, you love the gays and the lesbians, you love the Buddhist and the prostitute. And he's literally just saying things that you're like, what? You can say that in worship? And yes, God does love the Buddhists. He loves the Presbyterians. He loves the lesbians. He loves, you know, he loves them all. But it was just like this box breaking approach to the place of worship. So Prosh, heavy Prosh influence on me. I would have to say Martin Smith, probably, like a lot of people as well, growing up in the 80s and 90s. Early 2000s, Delirious, Martin, just, I mean, the guy showed us, you know, who you could become in the place of worship. You know, you could do secular rock festivals and your whole set is, I could sing of your love forever and my heart burns for you. Like worship in the midst of like secular rock festivals. And it was just really inspiring and cool to see that worship didn't just belong inside of a building. It could go to the streets and to the clubs and bars and festivals. And that was awesome for me as well. So I'd say those were my biggest two worship influences. Another, you know, very, very strong one for me was a man named Klaus. So Klaus, he was a gigantic part of my worship journey as a later teenager. He mentored Carrie Job and I, and was just a father. He's the first man that I ever knew to give his stage away to kids who are not as qualified, who are not as anointed, who are not as seasoned. He was really the first like worship father that I had real proximity to. and it was absolutely life-changing for me. So those are my top three, I would say.
Wow, that's incredible. And you are doing the same for a generation right now, Rick, and being an inspiration as a worship leader and a mentor, a coach, a worship pastor, all those things. I know everybody has been on the chat through this whole thing is just really, they're just getting so much out of what you shared today. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
Answering tons and tons of questions and really
love it.
A lot of helpful insight as well. You guys make sure, I know a lot of you already are probably following Rick Pino and what he's doing. Worship Coach is an incredible resource, so go check that out. And we'll be keeping you informed when we do more webinars. If you're not already following Access Worship International on social media, make sure you're doing that. Or take it a step further, go to our website, sign up for our email list. We won't harass you. We just want you to know about stuff that will be valuable to you that's coming out. So, and if you're watching this on YouTube later, which eventually it will be on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. Give us a like. That would help us out a lot.
Guys, I just want to say too that Kalani is one of my absolute favorite worship leaders, women of God, all of it. And she probably didn't know this, but she leads me in worship almost every day. I'm so hooked on the Seven Spirits of God right now song that you've written, literally almost every single day. And this is not an exaggeration. I'm praying for the Seven Spirits of God over my life every day, and you are helping to lead the charge. But please get connected to Kalani. She is absolutely changing the world. Stay connected to Access Worship. Oh my gosh, it'll be a gigantic blessing for you guys.
Thank you so much. Thank you, my friend.
Yes.
All right.
My joy.
Awesome. And it was good being with you today, Rick. Enjoy the rest of your day. Everybody,
you too.
Yes, we'll see you next time.
Let's do it again sometime. I would love to.
All right, we will. Cool.
Sounds
Thanks.
good.
Bye,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys.